My sister let out a small wounded sound, like a stepped-on animal. Her frantic texting stopped. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with terror. The display split into two columns. On the left, a series of screenshots from her social media during her divorce. A post with a picture of a single rose. Sometimes, walking away is the bravest thing you can do. #healing #new beginnings. A text to our mother, which I knew my mother had shown to half our relatives. I just don't know how he could be so cold. I gave him the best years of my life. The narrative was clear. She was the tragic, abandoned wife. Then the right column began to populate. A recovered email to her lover, the personal trainer, sent 2 days before she'd asked for the divorce. It read, "Can't wait for this to be over. David is driving me insane with his whining. You, me, and a beach in Cozumel, my treat. All his money is about to be our money." A low murmur swept through the audience. A woman who I knew was one of Eleanor's closest friends let out a horrified gasp. The evidence kept coming. A relentless, quiet cascade of truth. A hotel receipt from a business trip she'd taken, paid with a credit card she'd later reported stolen. A geotagged photo of her and the trainer, laughing, clinking champagne glasses on a hotel balcony in Savannah. Timestamped from the weekend she was supposedly at a wellness retreat. Finally, the audio file. A clip from a phone call with her best friend. Eleanor's light, musical laughter filled the room, a chilling counterpoint to the horror on her face. "Honestly, the man is so clueless." Her voice on the recording chirped. "He actually thinks he did something wrong. I've got him convinced he's the villain. The settlement is going to be massive. He feels so guilty, he's practically giving the money away." That was the moment the exodus began. It wasn't a rush for the doors. It was a slow, quiet, and deeply embarrassing bleed. People started to stand up, murmuring apologies to no one in particular. They couldn't look at my family. They couldn't look at the screen. An old couple, friends of my grandfather's for 50 years, simply put their napkins on the table and walked out, their faces set like stone. My Uncle Robert, the stockbroker, shook his head in disgust and made a beeline for the exit, not even bothering to get his coat. The foundation of their social standing, the bedrock of their reputation, was turning to sand beneath their feet. My mother, Beatrice, finally broke free from her paralysis. The shock had burned away, replaced by pure, unadulterated fury. She snatched the microphone from its stand, her knuckles white. "This is a lie," she shrieked into it, her voice cracking. The feedback squealed through the speakers, all of it. "Sylvia is sick, she's mentally unwell, she has always been jealous, a difficult, vindictive child. She's doing this to ruin her family, to ruin her grandfather's birthday." It was a classic performance, the cornered narcissist's prayer: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. For a second, a flicker of doubt crossed some of the remaining faces. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was just a cruel, elaborate fiction. But then my grandfather, Walter, did something I will never forget. He had been sitting at the head table, watching the entire spectacle with a strange, unreadable expression. Now he slowly, deliberately, pushed his chair back and stood up. The room fell silent again. He walked with a slow, steady gait to the podium. He gently took the microphone from my mother's trembling hand. He didn't even look at her. He looked at the screen, where Eleanor's damning words were still displayed. He looked out at the handful of remaining guests, his old, tired eyes filled with a profound sadness. Then he looked across the room, directly at me. His gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't disappointed. It was knowing. He turned back to my mother, who was staring at him, expecting him to defend her, to condemn me, to restore order. "Beatrice," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of 80 years of authority. "Sit down, let the girl finish her accounting." The words landed like stones in the silent room. It was absolution. It was validation. It was the complete and total annihilation of my mother's authority. She looked at him as if he had physically struck her. Her face crumpled, the rage replaced by a look of utter, devastating defeat. My father guided her, stumbling back to their table. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had undergone a tectonic upheaval, and I was at the epicenter. The final chapter began, without fanfare. The screen faded to black once more, and then my mother's face appeared, next to my father's. Chapter 3. The Foundation of the House. This was the one that mattered most. This was the one that explained everything else. The first image was a scanned document, crisp and clear. The letterhead read, Charleston County Registry of Deeds. It was a second mortgage agreement on the Davenport family home, the stately house on South Battery that had been my father's pride and joy, his inheritance from his own parents. The loan amount was for $250,000. The date was 3 years ago, just after Marcus's most catastrophic business collapse, and the signature next to my father's name was a near-perfect forgery. My mother, it turned out, was a much better forger than my brother. A collective gasp, louder this time, went through the remaining guests. I saw my father lean forward, squinting at the screen. He looked at the document, then at my mother, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Beatrice refused to look at him. She just stared at her hands, which were clenched into fists on the white tablecloth. The presentation continued, cold and methodical. A series of bank statements appeared, showing monthly payments on the secret loan being made from a hidden account. An email exchange between my mother and the loan officer, with my mother insisting on paperless billing, to a new secret email address she had created. The evidence was irrefutable. She had risked their home, their history, their security, all to hide the truth about their perfect son. But I wasn't done. The final piece of evidence was the one that was purely for me. It was a split screen. On the left, the email my mother had sent to the university admissions board, pledging a significant donation to secure Marcus's spot. The timestamp was April 12, 2012. On the right, the email she had sent to me, her own daughter, 1 week later, the one that told me with gentle loving regret that money was too tight to help with my dream of going to a real engineering school, the one that had set the course of my life, forcing me onto a path of loans and state college and self-reliance. Seeing them there, side by side, projected 10 feet high for all to see, didn't feel triumphant, it just felt true. It was the quiet, ugly truth that had hummed beneath the surface of our family for my entire life. I wasn't the failure, I was the one who had been systematically kneecapped, my own potential sacrificed, on the altar of my brother's mediocrity. The presentation ended, the screen went black, the house lights came up, stark and unforgiving. The silence that filled the room was different now. It wasn't shocked, it was funereal, it was the silence of an ending. My father, Richard, finally turned to my mother. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse, he just said her name, his voice a broken whisper that seemed to echo in the vast, empty space. Beatrice. That single word held a universe of betrayal. It was the sound of a man's world crumbling around him, the sound of a 40-year marriage turning to dust. I stood up from my table in the back. My legs felt steady. The cold knot of anger in my stomach had dissolved, replaced by a strange, quiet emptiness. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had simply held up a mirror and let them see their own reflection. I didn't say a word to any of them. I walked through the debris of their lives, past the stunned faces and the overturned glasses. I walked to the head table, where my grandfather was still standing. I stood on my toes and kissed his weathered cheek. "Happy birthday, Grandpa," I whispered. He squeezed my hand tightly, his blue eyes looking into mine. A small sad smile touched his lips. "You put the bag down, kiddo," he murmured, his voice for my ears only. "You finally put the bag down." I nodded. And then I turned and walked out of the Charleston Heritage Club, out into the warm, humid night. I didn't run, I didn't flee, I just walked. I didn't look back. The charade was over, my role in it was done. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. The silence from my family was absolute, and I guarded it like a precious treasure. I had blocked their numbers, their emails, their social media profiles. I had built a digital fortress, and for the first time, I was the one living inside it, safe and sound. The news of the fallout came to me in trickles, mostly through Zara, who had a morbid curiosity and an impressive network of industry gossips. The Davenport family had imploded with the force of a dying star. My parents' divorce was proceeding, and it was brutal. The discovery of the secret mortgage had nullified their prenuptial agreement, and my father, a man awakened from a long slumber, was being ruthless. The house on South Battery, the monument to their social standing, was on the market, its sale the only way to cover the mountain of debt my mother and brother had accrued. Marcus, stripped of his safety net, had been forced to face reality for the first time in his life. He was working a minimum wage job at a logistics warehouse. Worse for him, my father, armed with the evidence of the forged check, had reported him to the police. He was facing felony charges. There was no one left to clean up his mess. Eleanor's ex-husband, David, had been sent an anonymous email, I have no idea who from, though I have my suspicions about Zara, containing the link to the ledger. He had immediately filed a lawsuit against Eleanor for fraudulent misrepresentation during their divorce proceedings. He was suing to have the settlement overturned and to get his money back. Her life of leisure was about to come to a screeching halt. They tried to reach me, of course. Letters started arriving at my apartment, forwarded from my old address. They were a predictable progression of emotional manipulation. First came the pleading letters from my mother, full of tear-stained apologies and talk of forgiveness. Then came the angry, demanding letters from Eleanor, accusing me of being a monster. Finally, a single terse letter from my father's lawyer, formally disowning me, and stating I had been written out of his will. I read it and laughed. They thought threatening me with a loss of their money, the very thing they had always withheld from me, was a punishment. It was a gift. I threw all the letters into a recycling bin, unread. My life, in contrast, was quiet. It was peaceful. It was mine. The small apartment they had once pitied felt like a palace. It was a space unburdened by their drama, their demands, their constant draining noise. The money I was no longer pouring into the black hole of their irresponsibility started to accumulate. I got a major promotion at work, taking the lead on a new international cybersecurity project. The silly little computer job was now funding a life they could only dream of. I'm telling you this from a small cafe, not in Charleston. This one is in Lisbon, overlooking the Tagus River. The sun is warm on my face, and the coffee is strong. I came here for a month, just because I could. Because there was no one to ask for permission, no one to bail out, no crisis to manage, just me. And now I want to talk to you. Because I know some of you out there understand. Maybe not the specifics, not the projectors and the secret ledgers, but you understand the weight of being the family scapegoat. You know what it feels like to be the responsible one who is somehow always in the wrong, to have your successes minimized, and your love taken for granted. For years, I let them define my reality. I let them convince me that I was the problem, that their chaos was my fault. I was the unreliable one, the difficult one, the failure, all while I was the only thing holding their world together. The moment I stopped playing my assigned role, the moment I stopped accepting their narrative, their world collapsed, and mine began. So here's the question I'm left with, and the one I want to ask you: did I go too far? Some of you will say yes, that family is family, that some things are unforgivable, that I should have just walked away quietly, and maybe you're right. But I think about it another way. Think about a bone that has been set improperly. It causes pain, it limits movement, it poisons everything. The only way to fix it is to break it again, deliberately, and set it right. My family ledger wasn't just an act of revenge, it was an act of surgery, a painful, brutal, but necessary correction. It was the only way to stop the poison from spreading. It was the only way to finally heal. If you've ever felt like the designated scapegoat, if you've ever been the one holding it all together while being told you're the one tearing it all apart, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have walked away, or would you have opened the ledger? There's no right answer, but there's power in sharing the story. And if you want to hear more stories about people finally taking back their power and rewriting their own narratives, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, the most important thing you can do is refuse to be the villain in someone else's story, especially when you've been the hero all along. The plan wasn't a product of sudden, explosive rage. It was a contingency, a fire escape I had built for myself years ago, hoping I'd never have to use it. The ledger wasn't just a messy collection of files, it was a curated exhibition of the truth. My skills in data forensics were not just about recovery, they were about presentation. Evidence is useless if you can't tell a story with it, and oh, what a story the ledger told. I had designed it like a corporate annual report. Clean and damningly professional, the homepage was a simple, elegant title: The Davenport Family Ledger, a Decade of Unseen Liabilities. Below the title were three portraits: Marcus, Eleanor, and my mother, Beatrice. Clicking on each portrait would lead to their individual section, a meticulously documented history of their deceptions. For Marcus, it was a financial analyst's nightmare. I had created interactive charts that visualized his spiraling debts against the dates of my loans, which were clearly labeled as bailouts. The raw data was all there: scanned copies of canceled checks from my personal account, screenshots of bank transfers with memo lines like "for your new business idea," or "just to help you get back on your feet." But the data was just the skeleton. The flesh was in the multimedia files. I had audio recordings of his phone calls to me, captured using a simple call recording app I'd told him was for improving my work-from-home call quality. His voice, wheedling and desperate one minute, arrogant and entitled the next. "Sylvia, I just need 5 grand. That's it. I have a sure thing. I'll pay you back double next week." And then, a week later: "Look, I don't know what to tell you. The deal went south. You can't tell Dad. You just can't." The crown jewel of his section was the evidence from his most audacious act of fraud. He had tried to take out a business loan using our father's identity. I had intercepted the confirmation email, flagged it as fraud with the bank before it was processed, and then covered the initial application fees myself to make the problem disappear. I had the application, complete with his forged signature of our father's name. It was all there, organized by date, cross-referenced, and undeniable. Eleanor's section was titled "A Study in Narrative Control." It was less about money, and more about pure, unadulterated deceit. I had created a timeline. On the left side were her public statements, social media posts about her difficult journey, screenshots of texts to family members about how she was trying so hard to make her marriage work. On the right side was the reality I had helped her bury: the recovered emails with her lover, filled with casual cruelty about her husband; the deleted photos from their weekend trips, with embedded GPS data, pinning them to romantic inns and secluded beaches. I even had a snippet of a phone recording where she laughed with a friend about how she was going to take David for everything he's worth. The centerpiece was a legal analysis. I had taken her divorce settlement agreement and highlighted every clause that was predicated on her being the wronged party, the victim of emotional cruelty. Beside each highlighted section, I placed a corresponding piece of evidence that proved it was a lie. It was a monument to her hypocrisy, built from the very bricks I had provided. The final section was the most difficult to build, and the most devastating. It was for my mother, Beatrice. It wasn't about a single dramatic event. It was about a long, slow, quiet betrayal of one child for the benefit of another. For years I had managed the family's home network, their computers, their cloud backups. They saw it as a chore. I saw it as an all-access pass. My mother was meticulous about keeping digital records, a fact I now used against her. I had found a hidden folder on her computer, labeled "Family Finances." In it was the truth about the second mortgage. She had taken it out on the family home, a house that had been in my father's family for generations, to cover a massive six-figure gambling debt of Marcus's. She had forged my father's signature on the documents, and had been making secret payments for years, siphoning money from their retirement accounts. I had the scanned mortgage agreement, the bank statements showing the payments, and an email exchange with the loan officer, where she explicitly asked for all correspondence to be sent to a private P.O. box. But there was more, a deeper, more personal cut. I found her old email archives, an exchange with the admissions office of the prestigious university Marcus had attended. In it, my mother leveraged my father's business connections and a hefty donation to the university's alumni fund to secure a place for Marcus, whose high school grades were mediocre at best. That part stung, but it was the email she sent the following week that truly broke something in me. It was to me. I was in my senior year of high school, a straight A student, with dreams of studying computer science at a top-tier engineering school. The email was kind, but firm. She and my father were so proud of me, but money was tight. They couldn't afford to help with my tuition. I would have to go to the local state college and take out loans. I remember the crushing disappointment, the feeling that my own ambitions were a luxury the family couldn't afford. Seeing the two emails side by side, one spending a fortune to elevate my brother, the other clipping my wings, was the moment I understood. I wasn't just the scapegoat, I was the sacrifice. My useless job was the key to it all. They thought I just reset passwords and fixed printer jams. They had no concept of digital forensics. They didn't understand that a deleted file is rarely truly gone. That data leaves ghosts. That a hard drive holds a perfect memory, even if the user doesn't. I wasn't just good at my job. I was one of the best. I knew how to navigate the hidden architecture of their digital lives because I had built some of it. I had set up their Wi-Fi, installed their security software, and managed their cloud storage. They had handed me the keys to their kingdom, never once thinking I might one day lock them out. I couldn't have done it alone, not really. Zara was my rock. I remembered a conversation we'd had a year ago. I was in a particularly low place after covering another one of Marcus's emergencies. I was complaining, venting, feeling helpless. Zara, ever the pragmatist, cut through my self-pity. "Stop thinking of it as a diary, Sylvia," she'd said. "A diary is for feelings. What you need is a chain of custody log. Document everything, every request, every transaction, every lie, encrypt it, back it up in 3 different geographical locations. Think of it as a professional asset. It's not for blackmail. It's your severance package. It's the proof you need to finally quit this job." She helped me design the server's architecture. Triple redundant backups, one in a cloud server in Switzerland, one on a physical drive in a safe deposit box, and one on a small, innocuous-looking device, hidden in my own apartment. We built in dead man switches. If I didn't log in for 30 consecutive days, an email with a link and a password would automatically be sent to my lawyer and to my grandfather. Zara called it mutually assured destruction. I called it peace of mind. After my moment on the balcony, as I was walking back towards the main ballroom, I nearly collided with my grandfather. Walter Davenport was a tall, lean man, stooped by age, but with eyes that were still startlingly sharp and blue. He looked different from the other old men in the room, less polished, more weathered, like a piece of old oak. He put a hand on my arm to steady me. "Easy there, girl," he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his brow furrowed. "You have the same look on your face your grandmother had right before she decided to sell the old summer house. Everyone told her not to, but she knew it was a weight we didn't need to carry anymore." He patted my hand. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders, Sylvia. Sometimes the only way to put a heavy bag down is to open it up and show everyone what's inside." I stared at him. Was it just a folksy platitude from an old man, or did he know? Had he seen the cracks in the facade all along? I never knew for sure, but in that moment it felt like a blessing. It felt like permission. I gave him a small, watery smile and continued back into the ballroom. The air felt different now. The polite chatter seemed shrill. The glittering chandeliers seemed harsh. I found a seat at an empty table in the back, tucked away in the shadows. I pulled out my phone. My heart was a steady, cold machine in my chest. I opened a network scanning app Zara, and I had designed. The Charleston Heritage Club's guest Wi-Fi was a joke. The password was Heritage 1776. There was no client isolation, no firewall between the guest network and the internal AV system. It was an amateur setup, designed for convenience, not security. It was an open door. It took me less than 5 minutes. I found the IP address for the Crestron controller that managed the room's audio visuals. The admin password was the factory default, admin. I suppressed a grim laugh. They spent thousands on orchids and champagne, but couldn't be bothered to change the default password on their 6-figure AV system. I navigated to the control panel for the main projector screen. the one currently displaying a looping slideshow of old family photos. I disabled the local input and redirected the source to a web browser. In the address bar, I typed the URL for my server. I hit enter. The ledger was cached, loaded and waiting. All I had to do was press go live. I sat back in my chair, took a sip of water, and waited for the perfect moment. It was time for the performance review. The moment arrived, gift wrapped in my mother's insufferable pride. It was time for the speeches. My father gave a short, mumbled tribute to his father. My uncle Robert told a long, rambling story that went nowhere. Then my mother, Beatrice, glided to the podium. She tapped the microphone, the sound echoing slightly in the hushed room. She beamed a radiant 1,000-watt smile out at the assembled guests. "Daddy," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "on this incredible milestone, your 80th birthday, I just wanted to say, that was as far as she got." From my shadowy corner, I tapped a single button on my phone's screen. The large display behind my mother, which had been showing a sepia-toned photo of a young Walter holding my father as a baby, flickered. It went black for a second, then lit up with a brilliant clean white screen. In the center, in stark black, sans serif font, were the words. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a soft, sharp sound, like 100 people drawing a breath at once. My mother froze at the podium, her smile locked on her face like a death mask. Her eyes darted from the screen to the crowd, confusion warring with rising panic. My father, Richard, stood up halfway, peering at the screen, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And across the room, I saw the faces of my siblings. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus's face, usually so ruddy and confident, had turned a pasty, sickly white. The screen changed. A portrait of Marcus appeared. Chapter 1. Marcus Davenport. A portfolio of mismanagement. Before anyone could react, the room's high-end speakers, which moments before had been playing soft jazz, came to life. It wasn't music. It was Marcus's voice, tinny and frantic, from a recording I'd made 6 months prior. "Sylvia, you have to help me. They're going to break my legs. I swear to God." It was a sure thing, a tech stock. It was supposed to triple. "I just need 20,000 to cover it. You have that, right? From your job? Please, Sylvia. You can't tell Dad. He'll disown me." As his voice pleaded, a graph appeared next to his picture. It was a timeline of his loans, from me, a jagged red line, climbing ever higher, totaling over $150,000 over 8 years. Each peak was annotated with the reason he'd given: startup capital, bridge loan, stock market loss. Then the image changed to a high-resolution scan of a check. It was drawn on my father's business account, made out to a known bookie in the city, for $50,000. The signature was a clumsy, obvious forgery of my father's name. A red arrow pointed to it, with the text intercepted and covered. May 14, 2022. Prevention of felony check fraud charges. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. Every eye was glued to the screen. Marcus, snapping out of his stupor, let out a strangled cry of rage. "Turn it off. Somebody turn that thing off." He started to charge toward the tech booth at the back of the room, his face a mask of crimson fury. But two of the club's waiters, large men, who were probably hired for security, as much as for serving canapés, stepped into his path, blocking him. He struggled for a moment, then sagged, defeated. My mother was still at the podium, utterly paralyzed. My father was on his feet now, his face pale, staring at the screen, then at Marcus, then back at the screen. The forgery of his signature seemed to be the thing that had finally broken through his denial. Eleanor, meanwhile, was frantically texting. My phone buzzed in my lap, again and again. "Stop it, Sylvia. Stop it right now. You're destroying this family." I didn't even glance at it. I was a spectator now, a curator presenting my work. I let the evidence do the talking. The whispers started to ripple through the crowd. Old family friends, business associates, the pillars of Charleston society. Their faces were a mixture of shock, confusion, and a kind of horrified, fascinated glee. The perfect Davenport facade was not just cracking, it was being dynamited. The presentation on the screen transitioned smoothly, a soft fade to black, and then a new slide appeared. Eleanor's face, beautifully made up, and smiling serenely, materialized next to the title, Chapter 2. Eleanor Davenport, a study in narrative control. They called me the unreliable one, Sylvia, the flake, the one who could never keep a plan, the one who was always a little bit scattered, the one whose life was a mystery of half-finished projects, and a silly little computer job that nobody really understood. In my family, reliability was a currency, and I was perpetually bankrupt. My brother, Marcus, he was the golden boy, the charismatic risk-taker. My sister, Eleanor, was the porcelain doll, beautiful and fragile. My mother, Beatrice, was the matriarch, the keeper of our family's pristine public image, and my father, Richard, was her quiet, enabling shadow. I was just Sylvia, the family's glitch, the line item that never quite balanced. For years, I was the designated scapegoat for every crisis, the convenient black hole where blame could be sent and never return. Marcus's spectacular business failures, which were really just poorly disguised gambling sprees, it was because I'd given him bad advice, or failed to be supportive enough of his genius. Eleanor's marriage collapsing in a storm of drama and tears, it was because my own cynical single life had somehow been a toxic influence on her. Every family argument, every financial shortfall, every crack in the perfect facade of the Davenport family somehow, magically, traced its origins back to me. They had no idea. They had no idea that my silly little computer job was in digital forensics and data recovery for one of the top cybersecurity firms in the country. They didn't know that while they saw a flighty, unreliable daughter, my colleagues saw a bulldog, a digital bloodhound who could retrieve a deleted file from a fried hard drive like it was a book on a shelf, and for nearly a decade, I had been their unwilling, unpaid, and unacknowledged digital cleaner. I was the one who scrubbed the internet of their mistakes, erased their digital footprints, and secured the evidence of their train wrecks on a private, encrypted server I called the ledger. It was my secret, my burden, my proof that I wasn't crazy. Tonight was my grandfather Walter's 80th birthday party. The whole affair was held at the Charleston Heritage Club, a place that smelled of old money, lemon polish, and quiet judgment. Chandeliers dripped light onto tables groaning with food. The city's elite, all friends of the family, mingled and laughed, their voices a soft, polite murmur. I stood by a pillar, nursing a glass of sparkling water, feeling like a ghost at the feast. I had almost not come, but a sense of duty, a deep and abiding love for my grandfather, had pulled me here. He was the only one who ever looked at me, and seemed to see, well, me. The evening wore on, a pageant of practiced smiles and hollow pleasantries. Then came the moment. My uncle, a portly man named Robert, who managed a portion of the family's investments, was talking to my father. His voice was just a little too loud, a little too lubricated with expensive scotch. He was lamenting a recent significant loss in a tech stock. It just plummeted out of nowhere, Richard. He boomed, shaking his head. A real bath, we lost a fortune. My mother, Beatrice, who had been holding court nearby, overheard. Her head swiveled, her eyes, sharp as ice picks, scanned the room and landed directly on me. A perfect, theatrical sigh escaped her lips. Well, she said, her voice carrying across the small cluster of people, I seem to recall Sylvia being the one who was so certain about that company. Weren't you, dear? All that talk about long-term holds in disruptive technology. My brother Marcus, ever the opportunist, piled on immediately. He draped a comforting arm around our mother's shoulders. Don't blame yourself, Mom. Sylvia gets these ideas from her computer world. It's not her fault she doesn't understand how real money works. Then Eleanor, dabbing at her eyes with a lace-edged handkerchief, as if the stock loss were a personal tragedy, delivered the final delicate cut. You're always so confident, Sylvia, so sure of yourself, and look what happens. Poor Grandpa's legacy. Her voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air like poison gas. The small circle of family and friends fell silent, all of them looking at me, not with anger, but with something worse, pity. Pity for my parents for having such a difficult daughter. Pity for my siblings for having such an unreliable sister. It wasn't a confrontation, it was a verdict, delivered calmly and publicly. I was guilty. Of what? Of a stock tip. No, I was guilty of being me. I stood there, the glass of water cold in my hand, and I felt a decade of swallowed anger, of silent service, of thankless effort, curdle in my stomach. For years, my secret mantra had been, it's not about revenge, it's about survival. But in that moment, under the warm glow of the chandeliers, with the eyes of my entire family branding me a failure, I felt a switch flip, deep inside my soul. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself, I didn't say a word, I just gave a small, resigned nod, as if to say, yes, you're right, it was my fault. I watched the relief on their faces. The crisis was averted, the blame was assigned, the family narrative was secure. I murmured a polite excuse about needing some fresh air, and slipped away, my heart beating a low, steady drum against my ribs. Tonight, the ledger would be opened. Tonight, there would be an accounting. I didn't go to the restroom, or out onto the main balcony, where other guests were smoking cigars and admiring the view of the harbor. I found a small private staff access door that led to a narrow ironwork balcony, overlooking a quiet, moss-covered alley. The air was thick and humid, smelling of jasmine and damp brick. I leaned my hands on the cool iron railing and breathed. I wasn't crying. The time for tears had passed years ago. What I felt was a strange, terrifying calm, a clarity so sharp it felt like a shard of glass in my mind. For so long, I had lived in a fog of their making, a constant state of low-grade anxiety and self-doubt. Was I too sensitive? Was I overreacting? Was I the difficult one they all claimed I was? The ledger had started as my anchor to reality, a way to prove to myself that the things they made me do, the messes I cleaned, were real. Now, it was going to be my voice. My mind drifted back. The memories weren't hazy, they were crystalline, each one a separate file in the cabinet of my resentment. The first entry in the ledger. I was 22, just starting my career, living in a tiny apartment, and eating ramen noodles 4 nights a week. I got a call at 2 in the morning. It was my mother, her voice a frantic whisper. Sylvia, you have to help. It's Marcus. Of course it was Marcus. He'd been given a credit card linked to my father's business account for emergency expenses during his first year of college. He had apparently decided that a losing streak on an offshore online poker site constituted an emergency. He'd maxed it out, nearly $10,000, in a single night. But that wasn't the worst part. In a fit of rage, he had spammed the poker site's forums with threats and accusations, using his real name and email address. The site's administrators had in turn threatened to report him for fraud and online harassment. Your father will kill him, Beatrice had sobbed into the phone. It will ruin us. The family name. People will talk. The family name. It was always about appearances. It was never about Marcus's actual problem. So I went to work. I spent the next 48 hours without sleep, fueled by caffeine and a sickening sense of obligation. I used my nascent skills to perform a series of what the industry calls white hat hacks. I found a vulnerability in the forum's software and scrubbed his posts. I backtraced his connection through a series of proxies to make it look like his account had been hijacked from an IP address in Eastern Europe. I compiled a detailed, plausible report of a sophisticated phishing attack, complete with doctored logs, and sent it to the credit card company's fraud department. I even managed to get the charges reversed. I saved him. I saved them. My reward? A brief, tight-lipped thank you from my father, and a lecture from my mother about how Marcus was under a lot of pressure and that I shouldn't mention this to anyone, for his sake. A few weeks later, at a family dinner, I overheard Marcus telling a cousin that he was thinking of starting an import-export business. My father beamed with pride. I just stared into my plate, the metallic taste of injustice in my mouth. That night, I bought a domain name, something innocuous, a string of random characters, and set up a private, heavily encrypted server. I uploaded the original forum posts, the real transaction logs, the audio recording of my mother's panicked call. I labeled the folder Marcus_poker_incident_01. The ledger was born. It grew steadily over the years. Another folder was labeled Eleanor_divorce, My sister Eleanor had married a wealthy, kind but rather boring man from a good family. For 5 years, she played the part of the perfect wife. Then she got bored. She started an affair with her personal trainer, a cliché, so painful it was almost funny. She wasn't subtle about it. There were emails, text messages, photos stored on their shared family cloud account. When her husband David finally became suspicious and hired a lawyer, she came running to me. She sat in my apartment, the one she'd always called cramped and sad, weeping dramatically into a cashmere scarf. "He'll destroy me, Sylvia," she cried. "He'll take everything. They'll say I'm a terrible person. You have to help me. Please." She didn't want to save her marriage. She just wanted to control the narrative of its ending. She wanted to be the victim, so I did it. I felt disgusted with myself, but the pressure from my mother, the frantic calls, the guilt-tripping, it was a tidal wave. I spent a week meticulously erasing her digital trail. I wiped the cloud account, used a program to corrupt the specific data blocks on her phone where the incriminating photos were stored, and even created a fake email from a friend advising her to delete everything because she'd heard David was acting erratically. It was a masterpiece of digital deception. I handed her plausible deniability on a silver platter. She got her wish. The divorce was settled in her favor. She came out of it with a generous alimony, the condo, and the sympathy of our entire social circle. David was painted as a jealous, controlling husband. 2 months after the ink was dry, I was at another family gathering. Eleanor was holding court, describing her ordeal. I heard her say to our aunt, with a dismissive wave of her hand, "It's a shame about Sylvia. She's so smart with all that computer nonsense, but I think it's why she can't find a decent man. She's just too wrapped up in her weird little world." The hypocrisy was like a physical blow. I had handed her the very foundation of her new comfortable life, and she used it as a platform to pity me. That night, I logged into the ledger. I had of course made copies of everything before I deleted it. The emails, the texts, the geotagged photos of her, and the trainer at a boutique hotel in Savannah. I uploaded them all. I added a new file, a screen recording of her bank account, showing the first alimony payment arriving. The folder was titled, Eleanor_divorce_fraud. It wasn't just the big dramatic cleanups, it was the constant draining financial support. It was a slow bleed, a death by 1,000 cuts. Marcus's business ventures, that needed seed money, money that I knew was going straight to a bookie. Eleanor's rent on her chic downtown apartment, that her alimony somehow never quite covered. My mother's casual requests for me to just handle a sudden mysterious bill. They all saw my steady, well-paying job, not as an achievement, but as a resource, a family slush fund. They criticized my modest apartment, my second-hand car, my lack of designer clothes, all while I was secretly financing their lavish lifestyles. I was the family's invisible pillar, holding up a structure that was rotten to the core, and they were busy complaining about the color I'd painted it. Standing on that balcony, the Charleston humidity clinging to my skin, all these memories coalesced into a single hard point of light, the stock tip. It was so trivial, so insignificant, compared to everything else, but that was the point. They hadn't just used me for the big things, they blamed me for the small ones too. They took my help for granted, and simultaneously held my skills in contempt. I was their digital janitor, and their court jester, all rolled into one. I pulled out my phone. The screen cast a cool blue light on my face. I looked at the little icon, a simple black square. That was my portal to the ledger. I thought of my friend and colleague, Zara. A few months ago, over drinks after a brutal week at work, I had confessed everything to her. I'd expected shock, or maybe pity. Instead, she just looked at me with her piercing, intelligent eyes, and said something that changed my entire perspective. "They're not your family, Sylvia," she'd said, swirling the ice in her glass. "Not in any functional sense. They're your clients. You're their crisis management firm, and from what you're telling me, they are years behind on their payments, and their account is toxic. It's time to fire them." Her words had been a lifeline. Fire them. It was such a simple, clean corporate concept. It stripped away all the messy, guilt-laden baggage of family and loyalty, and replaced it with the cold, clear logic of a business transaction. My service had been rendered. Payment had been, well, it had been the opposite of payment. It had been scorn. Tonight, At my grandfather's party, with that final public humiliation, they had defaulted on their last invoice. My finger hovered over the screen. The resolve didn't feel hot and angry anymore. It felt cold. It felt necessary. It felt like balancing a budget. I took one last deep breath of the thick night air and tapped the icon. It was time to collect.